based upon the regulations of the federal and the state, have you analyzed Senate Bill 722? And I guess, are we, under federal rules, as a state, even allowed to do this? Is it legal? Where are there any issues? I'm with everybody else. I'd like to help, but I want to make sure that what we're doing meets federal regulations. And do we have issues here? I've been told there are issues with 722.
Chair Taylor, Senator Hansel, and that's a concern for us also. I mentioned, that's why I kind of framed it up front, our concern about making sure we stay consistent with those federal requirements so we don't have some of those potentially drastic consequences. For Senate Bill 722, we have looked at that. There's not a clear-cut answer. As the recent federal shutdown started, we received letter guidance from the U.S. Department of Labor, who oversees the unemployment program. And in that letter, they were very clear to all states saying that people that were working full-time, even if they were not being paid, should not be receiving these civilian federal benefits, the UCFE program benefits. There is prior, more formal guidance from the U.S. Department of Labor that we believe would permit people to receive those benefits with this change of the definition of unemployed. This is a similar approach to one that some other states have taken, looking at state law to where the federal program goes to that. So our intent, it's not a clear-cut answer. We can't guarantee you that the federal government would say, yes, these were appropriate federal benefits to have paid out on our behalf. We believe that there's a good argument to be made there, and our intent is to process the claims that way. If the federal government ultimately agrees, then it would work kind of, as I said, they would reimburse us for most of the cost of administering those claims and for the benefits themselves. Should they disallow those costs as a result of one of the annual audits that we receive for running these federal programs, then the consequence would likely be that the state would be required to repay those federal dollars out of other state dollars, so general fund. And I do want to reemphasize the distinction between the civilian and the military benefits here. What I've just said is accurate for the civilian benefits, which is the larger group of people that were impacted during the shutdown. For the military benefits, we really don't see, because of that requirement that people be discharged or released from service, we don't think that that we can make the federal benefit programs pay benefits to those workers. Senate Bill 722 anticipates a general fund allocation for those smaller group of benefits. So doing that would not be inconsistent with federal law. So even though this bill is retroactive, now that that shutdown is over, this wouldn't impact the people that were just recently either furloughed or required to work without pay. If there is a subsequent shutdown without a bill that does something like this, we would not be able to pay benefits to the Coast Guard workers or to those accepted workers who are being required to work without pay. Like Oregon, most other states hadn't anticipated the separation of working and being paid. Some states, when they looked at their state laws, the definitions of unemployed and how that had been interpreted, they believed that the accepted workers were already covered. These are very rough estimates. There's just under 1,200 Coast Guard employees in Oregon we believe that were impacted. If we assume that they would get the highest possible unemployment benefit amount, which looking at average wages we think is a reasonable assumption for this, if they all were to claim and receive benefits, that's about $750,000 in benefits for each week claimed. We don't know how long a shutdown would go on, but for each week that they receive benefits, that would be the approximate cost. For the furloughed workers, the people that were told not to work, if we have another shutdown, they would again be able to receive benefits as they were before. If there is not a change in state statute, then those accepted workers would not be able to receive any unemployment type benefits, and the same for the Coast Guard employees. So, what we did is we looked at civilian employees in Oregon that work for agencies whose appropriations were not going through because of the shutdown. So there are a number of other agencies that have civilian workers in Oregon that weren't impacted by this last shutdown. For the ones that were impacted by this last shutdown, we believe there's about 9,600 civilian workers in Oregon. What we don't know is how many of those were furloughed and how many were accepted, being required to work. As I mentioned, we had about 3,300 claims that were filed. Most of those were from furloughed workers. Some accepted workers did file a claim that we had to deny. Some very rough estimates that there's about 5,300 workers in Oregon that worked for those impacted agencies that were being required to work without being paid. If we apply that same logic that you did and multiply that out, still using that maximum weekly benefit amount, that's about $3.3 million a week. That is a really very rough kind of back of envelope estimate of what that could be.